We are back, and we're going a little exotic today.
Subscribe, motherfucker.
Here we have a Nintendo Virtual Boy. I knew close to nothing about this console before taking a gamble on this broken one. I guess I was aware that it was a commercial flop, but I didn't know that it was only sold for 9 months when it was released in 1995. That's a crazy short lifespan for a console, but that makes it that much more desirable to work on for people that like working on retro tech like myself. It's always a great sign when there's things rattling around inside your broken retro consoles. So we'll see what's waiting for us on the inside. And perhaps one of the ways that Nintendo tried to keep costs down was by using a Super NES power supply for the Virtual Boy. All they did was essentially modify the housing to badge it for the Virtual Boy. And the power adapter plugs into the controller, and the controller in turn plugs into and powers the main console. The one thing that's actually missing with this bundle is the stand. So that's going to be a project for another day, but for now I just want to see if I can get it working. There's no on-off switch directly on the console. You power it on through the controller, and it's great to see that the console's powering up, game's working, we can hear the audio, but as you can see, the left lens is completely dead. There's only an image on the right lens. The image that we are seeing is actually quite blurry, so something tells me that that rattling noise from earlier has something to do with the focus adjustment slide on the top. We'll take a closer look at that when we tear the console down. First thing to come off is this crusty and torn eye shade. I'm going to have to see about sourcing a replacement for that. And then I ran into a somewhat unexpected roadblock. I have 2 sets of Nintendo Gamebit drivers, one that's part of the iFixit set, and one is a generic set that I bought off Amazon as a backup, and neither set was small enough to travel down the screw holes of this thing, so couldn't even reach the screws to open it. This was incredibly frustrating. I'd been trying to find time to work on this project for a couple of weeks now, and here I was just kind of stuck, not able to even start. So I went ahead and ordered the right screwdrivers off Amazon. They're going to take another couple of days to get here, but I was so fired up to work on this thing. I went down to the garage and I started filing down the generic backup set that I have to try and get them round and narrow enough to travel down the screw holes. So at least I could try and do something tonight. That fit in there, so this is going to have to do for now. This is just a small ratchet tool, and even though the bit doesn't fit in there properly, I was able to get most of the screws out, minus the 2 side screws, which were deeper than the rest and really close to this plastic lip where the ratchet just couldn't turn the bit. So I was kind of scratching my head again there a little bit. I tried using this mini adjustable wrench that I have, and the jaws just wouldn't grab the bit. I tried using needle nose pliers, and it was just too far down in there. Couldn't get any sort of grip. So went back down to the garage, took out another file, and started filing a channel so that I could use a flathead screwdriver to turn this bit while it was in there. And if it was going to get this thing open tonight, I was determined to do everything I could to work on this project today. And the damn thing worked. This is not how I recommend you open anything that needs a Gamebit screwdriver, but I really had to think outside the box so that the evening that I'd set aside to work on this project was not wasted. It wouldn't be the first time, but it's pretty funny the kind of things you run into sometimes working on projects like this. Well, that would explain why our left lens isn't working. This ribbon cable has completely separated from the LED daughter board that generates the image. So this is apparently a pretty common problem with the system, and I don't believe they're actually soldered on. They're connected with some sort of adhesive that just degrades over time. Here's the culprit causing our rattling noises, so we'll have to see where that broke off from. This board at the top houses the cartridge connector and some of the primary electronics. Need to get that out of the way to access the soundboard, which is what connects to the 2 left and right speakers. And both of these daughter boards for the controller and the sound are grounded using these clip-on grounding cables that need to be pulled off the frame. Everything else that's left in here is mounted to this metal frame, so it all comes off in one piece. And here I'm just temporarily masking down the working ribbon cable because I know it's extremely sensitive and I don't want to inadvertently bump it into something while examining the rest of this block. Now, despite the fact that the system was a commercial failure for Nintendo, it's hard to argue that it wasn't innovative or ahead of its time, despite the 3D technology being primitive by today's standards. I was pretty fascinated reading up about the system. These 3D daughter boards on the side generate a single beam of light through a magnifying glass that hits a vibrating mirror that vibrates at 50 times a second to create the illusion of a 3D image. That's pretty crazy technology for something that came out in 1995. Anyway, at this point, I'm just trying to figure out where that white plastic piece broke off from, and I'm really hoping that I'm not going to have to disassemble this thing any further to attempt to repair it, because I'm dreading the thought of putting it back together if I indeed need to do that. And there's our focus adjustment, and we can clearly see where that white piece broke off from. We'll zoom in and work on that up close in a minute. I think for now, I need to take these two LED daughter boards off. Here we get our first look at the LED array. This blew my mind, guys. There are 244 LEDs arranged in a single row on this tiny little board. Now, as far as this knob goes, it looks like it broke off clean. Here, I'm just trying a dry fit, so I'm imagining how I would clamp it down once I introduce adhesive, in this case, epoxy. So I had the idea to just clamp it down with some Kapton tape once I glue it in place, and judging by this dry fit, I think that's going to work just fine. This is not the sort of repair you want to use super glue for. This is a high stress area that's going to experience quite a bit of force from moving the focus adjustment slider left and right, so you have to use epoxy. So I'm just using some plastic weld from JB Weld, and this stuff supposedly dries in 5 minutes and cures in an hour. From my experience using it, you really only have about 3 minutes before the consistency begins to change a little bit and it gets more gooey. And as far as the curing time, I think a couple of hours to be on the safe side before introducing any movement to the part. With my eye on the clock, I apply a small dab to both ends. I marry the two pieces together, and using a piece of Kapton tape that I had ready to go, I went ahead and clamped everything down. I'm about 2 minutes in at this point, so I have a little bit of time to make some final adjustments before leaving this thing alone to cure all the way. Alright, we will check back in on this guy later. Enough of the foreplay. I know what you guys came here for, so I'm going to spare you the narration on this next little section. All I'm going to do is clean off the ribbon cable and melt some of the plastic to expose the internal pins as I solder it onto the LED daughter board. Back to our epoxy job, let's see how that focus adjustment slider is doing. It's feeling super solid, came out really straight. I'm really happy with that job. And despite the fact that it's feeling smooth, I'm gonna add some lithium grease to the plastic moving parts just to make it that much easier on the movement of this mechanism. With the mechanism all greased up and the slider on the case itself as well, everything seems to be moving very smoothly. Putting the block back in and testing the slider out, we can actually see it is now controlling the focus adjustment properly. Now, as far as testing out the repair, we pretty much have to put the entire console back together. The motherboard is the very last thing to go in, and all the daughter boards plug into the motherboard, including the two LED daughter boards. So it's not worth trying to hook them up without putting them in the case and just having everything dangling around. We might as well reassemble it and see what we get. We don't need to put in the case screws just yet. This should be enough to pop in a game and fire it up. And I can tell right away that it's working. You guys probably can't see anything, so let me turn off the lights. And there we go. So that's the screen that we repaired, and scrolling over to the right lens, you can see the remainder of the picture. And now the focus slider actually does its job, so once you dial it in, you can see the text is much more crisp. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I don't have the stand for this console, so this is the best I'm going to be able to do in terms of demonstrating some gameplay. It's really hard to describe the 3D experience that you get looking through the eyepiece, but it really is amazing, guys. I mean, for something that came out 25 years ago, it's very, very cool. I know this console doesn't get a lot of love, but as someone that has amassed quite the collection of retro consoles, I'm giddy with excitement about successfully repairing one of these and adding it to my collection. After installing the case screws off camera, I temporarily taped on a camera stand so that my wife and I could spend an evening and just enjoy this thing, and it did not disappoint. It is a novel experience. It's primitive 3D at its finest. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you here on the channel again soon. Take care.